We'll continue the conversation that we've been having with gender activists. I'm going to introduce them by name now. Lindelo Ngumalo, Rosie Mutene, Lisa Vetten, and of course, Omam Lebo Ramofoko. So let's continue the conversation. Let's continue the conversation that we were having shortly out of that particular media briefing and bring it back to the state of gender-based violence in the country. Before we went to break, we're talking about the silence around harassment in corporate workspaces. And Lisa, you raised something that there is no record that is at least researchable as far as harassment is concerned. Link that to us for the declining numbers also of women that even go to report sexual violence against them.
You know, I think you create a bit of a self-defeating circle or cycle, is that if you chase women, if less women report, less cases enter the criminal justice system, so it continues. If you chase women away, they continue to lose faith in the criminal justice system. They don't see convictions happening. They are less likely to report. So we've got a bit of a self-defeating cycle going on here, which has a lot to do with reporting and watching what happens to your case, because you've got to live. You basically, if you go and report a rape, you must know that you're putting aside the next 3 years of your life to engage with the criminal justice system. So you're going to ask yourself some questions. For the next 3 years of my life, do I want to be reminded of this, or do I just want to get on with my life? And I think a lot of women make the choice of, I want to get on with my life. I don't want to have to think of this every so often. Just as my life is getting together, I've got to go back to court. This upsets me very deeply. It takes me weeks to recover. So, you know, I can understand the trade-off. Naturally, you'd like someone to continue, but at what cost?
How does this play itself out then at university level? Interestingly enough, I think universities have become not just universities, but I think institutions of higher learning have become spaces for agitation in the country, especially when you look at how multiple universities across the country have been also holding their individual protests against the violence that is being meted out against young people.
Well, I think also on the same basis as a lot of corporates, what's been happening is that the minute a case is reported, instead of holding that person accountable, they'd rather have a intermediary or whatever it is, and then the person suddenly resigns, you know, on their own will. And we believe, in fact, and we've even seen it with the National Bus Line Service, where there's been a trail of perpetrators abusing people on the bus service, and every time that happens, the driver suddenly decides, well, that he doesn't want the job again. So this is another way that universities are getting around it, is that instead of a case being reported to the police, it's kept within campus security. Let's just sort this out, and then the professor, whoever the perpetrator is, resigns. But in most cases, then there's always the secondary victimization on the survivor or on the victim.
And in most cases, the victims who are, you know, the students, the female students or the women students in the universities, are the ones who actually carry the repercussions, because most often they are deeply affected.
Look at the Rose girls, look at the Wits.
Absolutely. They get pariahed and excluded, and yet the young men or the perpetrators are allowed to continue within the university space. Some of them get barred from universities. What does that mean actually in the long-term impact on that person's life?
And the Rhodes reference list actually showed or put a spotlight on just how poor the sexual harassment policies in universities are. And again, it's the same thing that we are speaking about around corporates, you know, about how you've got spaces that for the sake of their own name have actually shrouded what is happening in their environments on campus, in this case, in such secrecy, that in fact the chances of success is very small. We've seen that in UNAIDS, you know, in a UN agency, you know, when even with Michelle Sidibe, who had to leave, where a number of cases came there. And if you listen to the women who spoke about, in fact, what happened, even the sexual harassment cases in the UN were despicable.
Sure. I'm going to allow you a moment then to also finish your thoughts, but we'll have to do that after the short break. So we'll carry this conversation on then until 8 o'clock. So they'll have still a bit more time to give their insights. So short break, News at Prime continues in a moment. Do stay with us. right, you're live on News at Prime. Thanks for staying with our conversation tonight. My panel of experts continue to join the conversation, and I think some interesting themes have really come up in terms of the scourge and the plague, really, of gender-based violence in the country. And this week, we've seen South African women and South African men, in an unprecedented way, come together to again add their voice to the need to end the violence that we're seeing meted out, especially by men against women. And it's been interesting to see how the multiple conversations have been playing themselves out, not just on social media, because that's not always an accurate measure of conversations, but even when you're just, listening to people around town and what they have to say, it's really caught the attention of the nation. And tonight, the president issuing a statement committing government action, especially in strengthening the criminal justice system. We'll have to wait and see whether or not that has any progress then, and if it encourages more people, especially women who have come under attack, to go and report cases to the police. Because what we know is that many people simply do not trust the criminal justice system, even more so when they have been violated in cases of sexual assault. So, Nkeletseng, let me begin with you, because before we went to break, you had a burning issue you wanted to talk about.
No, I think what I wanted to add on was what Lynn was talking about on the psychological effects of the violence itself. And I mean, not only at universities, let's look at school-going children.
Right.
I have a case of a girl who was raped at school by another school-going kid. The only repercussion was that the boy was expelled. But now she attempted suicide twice because she had to stay in that school. No criminal charges. Again, the child has, university level, they can be banned or whatever. But what do you do when the Constitution says the child has the right to education, but now you can only move them from one school to another? What guarantees, what corrective measures are there to make sure that he doesn't go and perpetrate when he gets to the next school? So those are all the issues that we need to look at and find ways to deal with.
I wonder, Lisa, before then you talk a little bit to us about the research and what it's showing about where we are as a nation. Are we doing enough research on perpetrators of this crime, whether it's sexual assault, whether it's gender-based violence, and really trying to understand what drives it?
I think one of the difficulties about research in South Africa is that because the HIV epidemic in this country has been so overwhelming, it has focused and created a very particular kind of research, so that we've looked at gender-based violence only in relation to HIV. That's a problem, because it's skewed and silenced us from thinking about the problems in other ways and from other perspectives. It's given us a very public health approach, so it means we don't have enough of an understanding of other things that are potentially going on. So, for me, something that would be really important to do is, if you look at our homicide statistics, from the 1990s, from about 98, 99, they started going down. So by 2011, 12, they were the lowest they'd been in decades. Something happened then, because in 2012, 13, they've been going up every single year. So we're talking about a crisis now, but actually the increases started a couple of years ago. But we have a recent period in our history where something was working, something was reducing that rate, and something has happened to push it up again. So that could give us a very practical understanding of what it was that we could do that might make a difference.
But with the lack of research, does that bring you closer to answers? Because
no, it doesn't.
Obviously,
well, it doesn't, because people tell you.
There is some research that was done with perpetrators, and one of the things that some of the things that were identified was parenting. So a lot of the perpetrators spoke about, there was a correlation between how they were parented, corporal punishment that South Africans love. With some perpetrators saying, when I did wrong in my family, I would even be made to go and sleep in the dog kennel as part of punishment. And it gives you a sense around, what happens with parenting, especially when 60% of children are in single-headed households. So we've got men out there who've got children who've just abdicated their responsibility in that regard. The availability of alcohol in communities has also been one other thing that has come up. I think my major problem with South Africa is that we don't do the simple things consistently, and we don't do them well, and I think that is why you will then see that some things, will just flare up again.
Sure. Rosie?
No, I'm agreeing with her, but also in terms of young boys, is that who are their role models? Who are they looking up to? You know, a survey was done, I think it was 2009, where they interviewed young boys from the age of 7 till about 13. I can't remember the exact ages, but a lot of their role models were female, because of who's raising them, their grandmothers and so forth. And so when they do look for role models, it's the guy who's carrying the gun in the music video. It's the guy that's the villain on Isidingo or whatever it is. Sorry to bring up another.
No,
but
no,
you know where I'm
go
going.
ahead.
That was me, my disclaimer, you know.
No, sure.
So it's also setting that up, and then also taking it to home is that in terms of gender equality, what have you established at home? What are the roles? Have you established specific roles for boys and girls? Are they doing the same thing? You know, so it's also those type of narratives. What conversations are you having around the dinner table in front of your children?
Or can you have conversations?
Yeah.
I always make
Yeah,
this
yeah, yeah, yeah.
example. When my daughter was 11, a woman left her home, left her daughter, that's 11, to come and look after my children, you know, as a domestic worker, you know. So even as we raise those issues, we must also understand the economic inequality in this country.
There's been a national call then. Multiple things are taking place across the country and have been planned. Literally, the president calling for days of prayers from tomorrow right up until Sunday. Stanton shut down. Tell us a bit more about that. What's going on?
I think it comes from the important need to begin to link the struggles, right? So we're seeing now so many acts of violence against asylum seekers, migrants, and you know, we're seeing that as sort of separate to the issues of gender-based violence, to the other issues of violence in the country. But if we ask different questions around our analysis and ask ourselves what are the drivers that we know create this kind of, you know, melting pot, or not melting pot, the kind of situation that we have now. What are those things? One of the things that underlies that is socioeconomic injustice, right? And the deep inequality, as Sislebo was saying, the deep inequality that exists between those who have and those who don't have, those who actually control the powerful narrative that is funded by, you know, the economy, and those people who are not even able to engage within that economy. And so, as a group of organizations, we thought it's about time that we link these struggles, because actually they are, you know, they have the roots in very many similar issues. And so we thought, we've marched to the union buildings, we've marched to police stations, we've marched to we've marched, right? Civil society, we have marched. But how do we begin to say the one thing that will cause an attention and will cause us to question is if we say to business, when are you going to take up your role? How is it okay that business continues as usual, where the lives of so many women, so many children, so many queer people, you know, migrant people, asylum seekers' lives continue to go, like, live in the state, as the president himself said, of crisis. There's a state of crisis, business takes over. And our priorities need to be, you know, kind of refocused to say that those very businesses thrive and continue to exist because of the very people who support that, because of the communities within, you know, they are stationed. And so that is kind of the thinking behind saying, let's take to the streets once again. And so we will be taking to the streets wearing black because we are mourning. We're mourning the state of the state.
When will this take place?
This will be on the 13th of Friday.
Black Friday.
Black Friday.
At 3 a.m. I think you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, obviously we say 3 a.m. because, you know, the point of Black Friday of the Sandton shutdown is to actually block off all entrances or exits from Sandton or into Sandton, to say the economy must literally come to a standstill.
They can't get to work.
So they can't get to work. If it's any time after 6 o'clock, we're too late. So we're going to congregate at 3 a.m. and we're literally going to shut down Sandton.
Sure. And it's going to be an incredible statement by the sounds of it. I want to pick up on something that you said, and perhaps Lisa, give you the last word, the link between human rights, or rather rights for women, ultimately being the attainment of human rights for all. Because if we get the women's rights right, then we would have done, I think, pretty much half of the job.
Yes, I think that would be really important. I think we still talk women's rights rather than human rights, which does suggest we're talking about two different kinds of people, humans and women. So it is important to use that language. I think it's also important for us to go beyond what we've done for the last 25 years. And far too much of our conversation continues to revolve around that criminal justice system, this, that, and the other. And I think what you're doing around economy is interesting, but we need to push beyond that to say, what are the links between economy? How do we get more women into the economy? How do we get the healthcare system, which has truly washed its hands of doing anything about the problem, despite the fact that that's one of the first ports of call for women? How do we push and get the health system better involved? And I think we are going to have to really, I know it's unpleasant, people often feel it's insensitive, but I feel we have to really start tackling the problem of men's violence towards each other, because that is not separate from what they do to women. And in fact, you'll find men who are violent to each other are also violent to women. So we've got to try and understand what is going on there, how it is that men convert these experiences of being abused as children into violence as adults. And to start looking at how do we disentangle that? Because it's not going to work to go on television and say, bad men, stop it now. That doesn't undo years of neglect, mistreatment and hatred.
All right.
And culture.
I've got 40 seconds left. Who's taking up the last 40 seconds?
Well, I think the struggle is not linear. And I think every effort and every moment is a moment for us to ponder and get on it. I know sometimes activists get tired, but, you know, it's a long walk.
And I think we need to ask questions differently.
Yeah.
I think we have so much history of research, of experience, even just sitting around this table. We need to ask our questions differently.
And also we need to feel our pain differently. We've been told for too long that we're rocks. We're not rocks, we're humans.
Yes.
We're allowed to feel pain. Our pain is valid.
All right. I think I'll leave it on that note then. Let me thank all of my guests for tonight. Hopefully you'll remember their names. I don't have enough time to reintroduce them to you. We're going to take a short break. I'm back at the top of the hour with the day's top stories. Do stay with us.